It is already 2026. We're in the midterm election year, 9 months away from Election Day, 9 months today. And Donald Trump and members of his administration are already making moves to try to illegitimately take control of the American election system.
All right, so this is it. The moment everyone's been talking about, the moment Trump's been warning about, the moment that seemed impossible just months ago. It just happened. The United States Senate just voted 68-32 to convict Donald Trump on impeachment charges. 68 senators, more than the toot herd's threshold needed. Enough Republicans broke ranks to remove a president from office for the first time in American history. This is unprecedented. This is historic. This is the nightmare scenario Trump's been screaming about since he took office for his second term, and it just became real. The charges, abuse of power, and violations of war powers tied to Trump's rogue Venezuela operation, the evidence weeks of brutal televised hearings, former aides testifying that Trump defied Congress.
Now, Trump doesn't want Republicans to lose the House and the Senate. One big reason in particular, I think, that he keeps making very clear.
You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
General saying he ignored constitutional limits, his own chief of staff admitting he weaponized prosecutions, and when the final vote came, when the clerk read the tally, enough Republicans said enough. We can't defend this anymore. We can't protect him anymore. This has to end 68-32. Trump is convicted, Trump is removed from office, and Washington is in absolute chaos because this wasn't supposed to happen. Trump survived 2 impeachments before. Both times Republicans protected him, both times the Senate acquitted, both times Trump walked away claiming vindication.
I don't think he's wrong, and I really think he's very obsessed with legacy right now, that he does not want to go for his third impeachment. He's obsessed with keeping control of Congress. I think, honestly, primarily for that reason, because it's not like he cares about passing legislation or cares about other people's electoral fortunes. But the thing is, he's obsessed about keeping Congress, and he has no real plan to do it normally or legitimately.
But this time is different. This time, the evidence was too strong, the constitutional violations too clear, the political pressure too intense, and enough Republicans decided they couldn't stand with Trump anymore. And Trump reports say he's erupting in private, refusing to accept the verdict, blasting the vote as a coup, claiming it's illegitimate, saying he's still the president, regardless of what the Senate says. But that's not how this works. The Constitution makes the Senate's verdict final. If 2/3 vote to convict, the president is removed. Period. There's no appeal, no do-over, no way around it.
If they impeached me, I never knew I was going to be impeached. I get a phone call, you just got impeached. I said, what does that mean? It took them 10 minutes. They impeached the president who did a damn good job. I rebuilt our military, Space Force, I got everything. I did a lot. They impeached me for nothing, twice.
Trump is out, and the fallout is just beginning. Because we're not just talking about Trump losing his office. We're talking about a political earthquake that's going to reshape American politics for a generation. The Republican Party just fractured MAGA Republicans who voted to protect Trump versus the institutionalists who voted to remove him. That's a civil war that's going to tear the party apart. And then there's what comes next. Because after conviction, the Senate can hold a second vote to bar Trump from ever holding office again. And if they do that, if they permanently ban Trump from running, 2028 gets completely reshuffled. Republicans have to find a new standard bearer. Democrats lose their favorite opponent. The entire political landscape changes overnight.
The administration actually understands that Trump is in trouble. The Republican Party's in trouble. And it's not just polling. Look at this. You might have seen this over the weekend. A Texas special election that happened over the weekend in which a Democrat flipped a red state Senate seat, winning by 14 points in a district Trump carried by 17 points in 2024.
But before any of that happens, we've got to deal with the immediate aftermath. Trump refusing to accept the verdict. His supporters calling this a coup, protests, maybe violence, a constitutional crisis over whether Trump will actually leave office or if he'll try to cling to power. This is uncharted territory. We've never removed a president through impeachment before. We don't know how Trump's going to react. We don't know if his supporters will accept it. We don't know if this ends peacefully or if it spirals into something worse.
You're going to have turnout that's going to be much higher. That was a low turnout election. Democrats tend to do better in those. But even a 10-point swing in the midterms would wipe out the Republican majority. Heck, a 5-point swing in the midterms would wipe out the Republican House majority. So they know what they're facing. They see the writing on the walls.
What we do know is that the Senate just crossed a line that seemed impossible to cross. They just did something no Senate has ever done. They removed a president, and the country is never going to be the same. Now, let me be clear about something. This scenario, this 68-32 conviction, it's based on real trends, real impeachment efforts, real vote counts that came close, real senators saying Trump's conduct is impeachable. In Trump's second real-world impeachment after January 6th, the Senate voted 57-43, just 10 votes shy of conviction.
We're about to hear an historic formal announcement of articles of impeachment accusing President Trump of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic chairman of 5 House committees were all set to reveal the charges on Capitol Hill. Now, this is only the 4th time in history that Congress is acting to potentially remove a president.
7 Republicans broke ranks. So we know bipartisan conviction is possible. We know some Republicans are willing to vote against Trump. And right now, multiple impeachment resolutions have been filed in the House. Senators are openly talking about Trump's Venezuela actions being impeachable. And Trump himself warned that if Republicans lose Congress, Democrats will find a reason to impeach him. So this isn't coming out of nowhere. This is the culmination of everything that's been building. The court losses, the abuse of power, the constitutional violations, the weaponization of federal agencies, all of it finally reaching a breaking point where enough senators said, we can't defend this anymore. And the vote just happened. 68-32. Trump is convicted. And we're about to see what happens when a president refuses to accept that he's been removed from office. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly how we got here, which Republicans broke ranks, and why what conviction actually means for Trump in the country, and what happens next in this constitutional crisis, because this is the biggest political story in American history, and it's unfolding right now. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's break down how we got to this historic 68-32 vote, because this didn't happen overnight. This was the result of months of pressure building, evidence accumulating, and Republicans finally reaching a breaking point. Start with the Venezuela operation, because that's what finally pushed things over the edge. Trump launched a military operation in Venezuela without congressional approval, completely bypassed the normal processes, ignored constitutional limits on war powers, and it went badly. Reports of civilian casualties, international condemnation, allies questioning America's credibility, and domestically both Democrats and Republicans in Congress furious that Trump acted unilaterally. So the House started holding hearings, brought in military leaders, former administration officials, people from Trump's own team, and the testimony was damning. Generals testified that Trump ignored their advice, that he pushed forward despite warnings about legal and strategic problems, that he explicitly rejected the idea that he needed congressional authorization. Former aides testified about Trump's mindset, about how he saw presidential power as unlimited, about how he viewed Congress as an obstacle to work around rather than a co-equal branch to consult. And then there was the smoking gun testimony, Trump's own chief of staff in those Vanity Fair interviews we talked about in another video, admitting Trump weaponizes prosecutions and lies about major scandals. That gave the impeachment effort credibility it hadn't had before, because now you had Trump's closest aide saying he abuses power, saying he uses federal agencies as weapons, saying he disregards legal and constitutional limits. So the House voted to impeach multiple articles: abuse of power, violation of war powers, obstruction of Congress, and this time a few Republicans joined Democrats. Not many, but enough to show cracks forming. And the articles went to the Senate. And that's when things got really interesting, because Senate Republicans were in an impossible position. They knew the evidence was strong. They'd watched the hearings. They'd seen the testimony. They knew Trump had crossed lines. but they also knew their base loved Trump, that voting to convict could end their political careers. So there was this internal war in the Republican caucus. Do we protect Trump and defend the indefensible, or do we vote our conscience and face the political consequences? And different senators made different calculations. Let's break down the groups. First, you had the MAGA diehards, the senators who were never going to vote to convict no matter what, who saw impeachment as a political attack and refused to even consider the evidence. These are the 32 who voted to acquit. Then you had the institutionalists, senators who care about congressional prerogatives, who believe in separation of powers, who think presidents shouldn't be able to launch wars unilaterally. These were the easiest Republican votes to flip. Then you had the moderates, senators from purple states, senators facing tough re-elections who had to weigh defending Trump against losing swing voters who were horrified by his conduct. And finally, you had the retiring senators, the ones not running again, who didn't have to worry about primaries or Trump's wrath, who could vote their conscience without political consequences. And as the trial went on, as more evidence came out, as the public pressure mounted, these groups started to shift. Moderates started signaling they might vote to convict. Institutionalists started speaking out about the importance of checking executive power. Retiring senators started saying Trump crossed a line, and the dam broke. One Republican senator announced he'd vote to convict, then another, then three more. And suddenly, there was momentum because once a few Republicans broke ranks, it became easier for others to follow. It wasn't one senator standing alone anymore. It was a growing group saying Trump's conduct was indefensible. And the vote came, the clerk called the roll, and one by one, senators voted. Democrats were united, all voting to convict. But mixed in were Republican names, senators from both wings of the party saying guilty. And when the final count came in, it was 68 to 32. 18 Republicans joined all 50 Democrats to convict Trump, more than the 67 needed. Trump was removed from office, and the Senate chamber erupted. Democrats cheering, some Republicans looking relieved, others looking devastated, and the country watching in shock as history was made because this had never happened before. Presidents have been impeached, but never convicted, never removed. This was new territory. Now let's talk about which Republicans flipped, because that matters. These aren't random backbenchers. These are serious senators, and their reasons for voting to convict tell us something important about where the line is. You had senators like Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, Susan Collins from Maine, Mitt Romney from Utah. These are moderates who've been critical of Trump before. Their votes weren't surprising. But you also had some surprises, senators who defended Trump in the past, who'd voted to acquit in previous impeachments, but who looked at the Venezuela evidence and said, this is too far. We can't defend this. And crucially, you had a few senators from red states, senators who won Trump-heavy districts, who knew voting to convict could end their careers, but who did it anyway because they believed it was the right thing to do, and their reasons were consistent. Trump violated the Constitution. He usurped congressional war powers. He acted like a dictator rather than a president bound by law, and that can't be tolerated regardless of party. So this wasn't just partisan. This was a group of senators from both parties saying the evidence was overwhelming and Trump had to go. And that makes the conviction legitimate in a way previous impeachment votes weren't, because it wasn't purely along party lines. It was bipartisan. It was based on evidence. It was constitutional process working the way it's supposed to. Now, what does conviction actually mean? Let's get specific, because there are immediate legal and political consequences. First, Trump is immediately removed from office. He's no longer president. J.D. Vance becomes president. Secret Service changes their protection protocol. Trump loses access to classified information. The transition happens immediately. Second, the Senate can hold a follow-up vote on whether to bar Trump from ever holding federal office again. This only requires a simple majority. So if Democrats want it and a few Republicans join, Trump's political career is over. He can't run in 2028, can't run for Congress, can't hold any federal position ever again. Third, Trump loses the legal protections that come with being president. All those cases that were on hold or moving slowly, they accelerate. Prosecutors who were waiting for Trump to leave office can now move forward. Trump faces criminal trials as a private citizen without the powers of the presidency to delay or obstruct. Fourth, Trump's grip on the Republican Party shatters because half the Senate just voted to remove him. That's a massive repudiation. Republicans who voted to convict are going to fight for the soul of the party against MAGA Republicans who see them as traitors. This is a civil war that could last years. And fifth, the political landscape for 2028 completely changes. If Trump's barred from office, Republicans need a new nominee. Candidates who've been waiting in Trump's shadow suddenly have an opening. The entire primary reshapes itself around who can unite a fractured party. So the consequences are massive, immediate, and irreversible. But here's where things get dangerous because Trump's not accepting this. Reports say he's claiming the vote is illegitimate, that it's a coup, that he's still the president, and his supporters are echoing that. Social media is exploding with claims of a stolen presidency, calls for protests, some even talking about violence to restore Trump to power. So we're entering a constitutional crisis because what happens if Trump refuses to leave? What if he claims the White House is still his? What if his supporters try to physically keep him in power? That's uncharted territory. We've never had a president refuse to accept removal through constitutional process. We don't know how this plays out, but we're about to find out. All right, so let's break down what this conviction actually means, not just for Trump, but for American democracy, for the Republican Party, for the presidency itself, because the implications of this moment are enormous. First, let's talk about what this says about constitutional accountability, because for the first time in American history, the impeachment process actually worked the way the founders intended. Congress checked a president who abused power. The system functioned, and that matters because there's been this question for years about whether impeachment is even a real check anymore. In an era of extreme partisanship, can you ever get 2/3 of the Senate to convict? Or has impeachment become a dead letter, a constitutional mechanism that can't actually be used? Trump's conviction answers that question. Yes, impeachment can work if the evidence is strong enough, if the constitutional violations are clear enough, if enough senators put country over party, you can remove a president. And that's huge for the future because it means presidents know there's a real consequence for abusing power. It means the threat of removal isn't just theoretical. It means the Constitution's check on executive power still functions. But at the same time, it took so much to get here. It took Trump launching an unauthorized war. It took his own chief of staff admitting he weaponizes power. It took months of televised hearings with damning testimony. It took 18 Republicans willing to end their political careers. That's a really high bar, maybe too high, because it means presidents can get away with a lot before they face removal. They can abuse power in countless ways. And as long as they don't cross that extreme line, as long as they keep enough senators loyal, they're untouchable. So yes, the system worked, but barely and only in the most extreme circumstances. Second point, what this does to the Republican Party, because this is a fracture that might never heal. 18 Republican senators just voted to remove a Republican president, and the other 32 voted to protect him. That's not a disagreement. That's a fundamental split about what the party stands for, about whether constitutional principles matter more than loyalty to Trump, about whether there are lines that can't be crossed, even to protect your own. And both sides are going to fight over this for years. The senators who voted to convict are going to argue they saved the party from defending the indefensible, that they chose country over party, that they're the real patriots. But MAGA Republicans are going to see them as traitors, as sellouts, as part of the establishment that's always hated Trump, and they're going to primary every single one of them. They're going to try to drive them out of the party. So you've got this civil war between Trump loyalists and institutionalists, between MAGA and traditional conservatism, between those who think Trump can do no wrong and those who think he finally went too far. And that war is going to define Republican politics for the next decade, because it's not just about Trump anymore. It's about what the party believes, what it values, who it represents. And there's no easy resolution because both sides have bases. Both sides have donors. Both sides have media ecosystems. This is going to be a long, brutal fight. Third point, what happens to Trump personally? Because conviction doesn't just mean he's out of office. It means his entire world changes. No more presidential immunity, no more ability to delay prosecutions, no more power to pardon allies or pressure prosecutors. Trump becomes a private citizen facing multiple criminal investigations, and those investigations are going to accelerate. Georgia, federal January 6th case, classified documents, maybe more. Prosecutors who've been waiting for Trump to leave office are going to move forward aggressively. And Trump can't fight them the way he used to. He doesn't have the presidency's resources. He doesn't have executive privilege. He doesn't have the bully pulpit to attack investigators. He's just a defendant, a very rich, very famous defendant, but a defendant nonetheless. And if he's convicted in any of these criminal cases, Trump could actually go to prison. That's a real possibility. Now, the former president of the United States behind bars, that would be unprecedented, historic, and absolutely devastating for Trump's legacy. But even if he avoids prison, his reputation is destroyed. He's the first president ever removed from office. That's how he'll be remembered, not as a transformative leader, but as the president who abused power so badly that even his own party couldn't defend him. Fourth point, the political reshaping for 2028. Because if the Senate bars Trump from future office, which they probably will with a simple majority vote, the entire presidential race changes overnight. Republicans lose their front runner. All the candidates who've been afraid to challenge Trump suddenly have an opening. DeSantis, Haley, whoever else wants to run. They can actually compete now, and the primary becomes about who can unite a fractured party, who can appeal to both Trump loyalists and the institutionalists who voted to convict him, who can win over swing voters who are horrified by Trump but might vote Republican with a different nominee. That's a really hard needle to thread, and it's going to produce chaos, multiple candidates, bitter primary fights, maybe a contested convention, and Democrats lose their favorite opponent. They've been preparing to run against Trump to make the election a referendum on his chaos and corruption. But if Trump's barred from office, they have to pivot. They have to run against someone new, someone who might not have all of Trump's baggage. So 2028 becomes unpredictable, wide open. Anything could happen. Fifth point, the constitutional crisis if Trump refuses to leave, because that's the nightmare scenario everyone's worried about. What if Trump claims the conviction is illegitimate and refuses to vacate the presidency legally? He has no case. The Constitution is clear. If 2/3 of the Senate convicts, the president is removed. There's no appeal, no higher authority. The Senate's verdict is final. But Trump doesn't care about legal niceties. He's already claiming this is a coup, that the vote was rigged, that he's still the legitimate president, and some of his supporters believe him. They're talking about protests, about defending Trump, about using force if necessary to keep him in power. So what happens? Does Secret Service physically remove Trump from the White House? Do they transfer protection to J.D. Vance and just leave Trump unguarded? Do they split into factions supporting different claimants to the presidency? And what about the military? Do generals recognize Vance as commander-in-chief, or do some of them claim loyalty to Trump? Do we risk a split in the armed forces? These are terrifying questions, and we don't have good answers because this situation has never happened before. But here's what we know. The Constitution is clear. The Senate convicted, Trump is removed, Vance is president, and every institution that respects the rule of law will follow that constitutional process. Trump can scream all he wants. He can claim it's illegitimate. He can refuse to accept it, but he doesn't have the power to change the outcome. The presidency isn't his anymore, and eventually reality will force him to accept that. Final point, what this moment means for American democracy. Because we just witnessed something historic. The constitutional system worked. A president who abused power was removed. Accountability happened. But it almost didn't. It took everything going wrong at once for enough senators to break ranks. It took extreme circumstances. It took political courage that's rare, and that's scary because it means our system is fragile. It depends on enough people doing the right thing, on enough senators putting country over party, on enough voters demanding accountability. And if any of those pieces break, if partisanship overwhelms principle, if senators always protect their own, regardless of evidence, then impeachment doesn't work, and presidents can abuse power without consequence. So yes, celebrate that the system worked this time, but recognize how close it came to failing, and understand that we can't count on it working next time unless we strengthen democratic institutions and norms. This is a warning. Democracy survived, but barely. And it's going to take work to make sure it survives the next crisis, too. If you made it this far, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know what you think. Is this the end of Trump's political career, or will he find a way back? Drop your thoughts in the comments,